For the next segment, I'd like to talk about some key terms that web designers need to know about. Um, the first one is something called a server or a host. A server or a host is really nothing more than just a computer, but it's a computer that serves or hosts websites, making them live on the internet. A server or a host generally is nothing but a souped up computer that really isn't there for anyone to play with or connect to. A lot of times they don't even have a monitor or mouse or keyboard hooked up to them. They're simply computers that are connected to the internet that are serving websites to other people. Think of your computer and a server or host almost like a telephone. When we make a call to someone over the phone, your phone connects to their phone, and there's this live connection. When we are on our computer and we go to Google.com, for example, your computer is making a connection to their host, their computer. Their host then will send you the files that you need so that you can see Google on your computer. And your computer receives those files and puts them all back together, and then you can finally see what normally is Google.com. All that happens within a split second. So a host is not only a computer that makes websites live, it's got to be pretty fast, and it's also got to be connected to a very fast internet connection. A server or host may also be serving hundreds, if not thousands, of people at a time. So if you think about all the people in the world that are going to Google.com right this second, the host has to be big enough and on a fast enough internet connection to handle all of those requests. So hosts generally are something you have to lease as a service. A lot of times paying a monthly or maybe yearly payment so that your website can be live for that amount of time. The second term I want to go over with you is browser. Now, you probably already know what a browser is, but by definition, it's a program that translates HTML into a design or layout. We've used browsers before. Every time you get on the internet, you're using a browser. And a browser essentially takes the HTML code that the host is providing, and it translates it into what you see on your screen, into design or layout. A browser is really what understands colors and fonts and layouts in general. So a browser really is a translator. It translates web code, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and any other web code, and converts that to what you see on your screen. Now, browsers are interesting because there's so many different ones. The biggest browser in the world is Internet Explorer. And if you want to be a true web geek like me, you'll abbreviate that IE. So this is made by Microsoft Internet Explorer, which means it's primarily a Windows-based program. You cannot have Internet Explorer on an Apple computer at this point. Internet Explorer is currently on version 9. If you're working in the computer labs on campus, you might be on version 8. Version 6 was a truly horrible version, and according to some different web resources, less than 2% of the United States is still on Internet Explorer 6, which is a very small percentage, but there are people that still do. I point this out because every browser is different, and every version of every browser is different. And as web designers, it makes our lives a little bit more difficult because we have to make sure that our website, our design, looks good on all the browsers. What does that mean? Well, that means we might have to tweak our code a little bit sometimes so that it will be consistent across the board. Really in no particular order here, some other browsers that you should be aware of are Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, Apple Safari, and Opera. I'll go over these just a little bit. Internet Explorer we've already talked about. By definition, or by statistics, I guess, it's the largest one on the planet because more people have used it than anything else. In the United States right now, it's really, really slowing down in popularity. Um, and it depends on which stat you look at. Internet Explorer is either the number one or number two browser, second to Chrome in some regards. If you look at the total number of downloads currently per day in the United States, Chrome is currently being downloaded more often. Um, so you could argue that Chrome is the most popular browser in the U.S. If you look at historically how many computers already have the browsers installed, Internet Explorer wins by a long shot. So in most cases, most of the world has used Internet Explorer. The U.S. is kind of a trendsetter in technology, really, really moving towards Google Chrome at this point. Firefox has been around a number of years. It was always heralded as to be the Internet Explorer killer, and it just never really got there. But it's a very good browser still. It's the number 3 browser, but it's very secure and it's a good browser. Safari is made by Apple, and Apple has opened this up so that you can have Safari on a Mac or a PC. So even though it is an Apple product, you can have it still on your Windows-based computer. Opera is a browser that a lot of people haven't heard of, but it's actually fairly common. If you've ever used the internet or gone to the internet on some sort of device like a Nintendo Wii, for example, a lot of like satellite TV boxes have browsers installed. You're probably using Opera if you've ever looked at the internet on any of those. Even on a lot of older mobile phones that were web-enabled, Opera was the browser of choice there. For this class, I would like for you to have at least the first 4, Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, and Safari, and to look at those regularly, no matter what platform you're on, with the exception of IE, because you can't get that on a Mac. If you're on a Mac, look at Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. My personal preference right now is Google Chrome. I like that on a Mac and a PC. It is fast, it's smooth, and in my personal opinion, it's the most efficient with resources on your computer. Firefox is probably a pretty close second. If you're on a Mac, Safari would be my second. In the world of the web, it's so evolving and so huge. Mobile design is a big part of what we do, and it's not something we have to get into now, but when we're designing websites, we want to make sure that the newest technologies are being utilized and that the end user has the capability for those. Looking at a website on a mobile phone today is primarily a Google Chrome, Apple Safari audience. The majority of the smartphones out there are ran on Android or iPhone. Android is a platform made by Google, so Google Chrome is sort of the browser of choice there. Or an iPhone, which is the most popular smartphone, a singular model of smartphone in the world, and it runs on a version of Safari called Mobile Safari. But those 2 browsers make up almost all of the mobile market. If you have a Windows phone, it does use some version of Internet Explorer, but it's not the full-blown version, so obviously that's there. Now, the reason we need to talk about browsers is because they are translators, for HTML. Each one does things a little differently. And imagine this scenario. Imagine that I'm on a trip to Mexico. Let's say I'm on my honeymoon in Mexico, and we're at a restaurant, and I don't speak Spanish very well, but my wife does. So we're at a restaurant, and a waiter comes up and wants to know if I'd like some ketchup. So he speaks to me in Spanish, which I don't understand, so I look to my wife, and my wife says, "Would you like some ketchup? Would you like some ketchup?" She's translated the Spanish into English and says, "Would you like some ketchup?" I turn to my second wife. I said this was a made-up story, right? I turn to my second wife, and she says, "Do you want some ketchup?" "Would you like some ketchup?" says the first wife. "Do you want some ketchup?" says the second wife. Obviously, though, the answer to both of those is about the same. The question is about the same, but there are differences in the way that those questions are presented because the translators were different. Now, back to reality, to my one wife reality. uh, Translators and browsers translate things a little differently, and that's exactly what's happening here. Internet Explorer translates things a little differently than Chrome, a little differently than Safari, a little differently than Firefox, and so on. Um, Generally speaking, it's Internet Explorer versus the rest of them. What works in Chrome typically works in Firefox, typically works in Safari and Opera. But Internet Explorer is really the odd man out. So we'll be talking throughout the semester and throughout our lessons about the differences in Internet Explorer and some of the things we have to do to kind of make up for the fact that it's just different. Um, so as a web designer, IE oftentimes is sort of the thorn in my side when it comes to making sure my code is working right across all the browsers. So server and host, those two terms are interchangeable. Make sure you understand those are simply computers that are making our websites live. And a browser, even though you probably use them every day, it's nice to get a good definition on it. It's really just an HTML translator. A lot of other websites will tell you that it is sort of a window to the internet, which is true, but in doing so, it translates code into what you see on your screen. So we'll talk more about browsers a little bit more in another lesson later on, but for right now, that's where we're at. Thanks.